Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're going deep today. Well, always deep, but especially today. We're going way back in time to ancient Greece.
Oh, yes.
And we're going to be looking at two really fascinating civilizations, the Minoans and the Mycenaeans,
Yeah.
to see how they, and especially their rulers, really shaped Europe
Yeah.
politically, culturally. Like, their impact is undeniable.
It's pretty amazing to see how these early rulers from so long ago still have an impact on Europe today. You can see it in the halls of power and just like the culture.
I know, and we're not just talking like broken pottery shards.
Right.
These were real people,
Yeah.
kings and queens who made choices that affected entire civilizations.
Exactly.
We'll be looking at their ambitions, their lives, and even whether or not the Trojan War was real or just a myth.
Ooh, exciting. Well, both of these civilizations existed in the area we consider the birthplace of Western civilization. The Minoans, who were on the island of Crete, were this huge maritime power, known for their palaces and their art. But then around 1500 BC, they just declined, probably because of a volcano.
It's kind of sad. They were so powerful, and then boom, a volcano.
Yeah, nature can be pretty harsh.
Totally. But as the Minoans were declining, another civilization, the Mycenaeans, were rising up on the mainland.
Right on the Peloponnesus Peninsula.
And they basically took over where the Minoans left off.
Yeah, they adopted a lot of the Minoan art and architecture, even their writing system.
Which is like Linear B, right?
Yes, and Linear B is considered the oldest writing system in Europe that we've been able to figure out.
That's wild. So we can read what they wrote.
We can, although most of it's pretty boring stuff, mostly accounting records.
Ah.
Not really exciting stories of battles and kings.
Okay, so maybe no palace intrigue, but still.
Oh, it still gives us a glimpse into their lives. We see how their society was structured. They had kings, generals, landlords, common people, and even slaves.
Wow, a whole hierarchy. So even without epic tales, these records tell us something about their rulers.
Definitely. It shows that they were really organized, focused on resources, and keeping things running smoothly.
I can picture it, like super meticulous, making lists of everything.
Exactly. Now, even though we may not have those grand pronouncements from these Mycenaean kings, their influence is obvious in other areas, like their architecture.
Oh, totally. Those massive walls they built, what are they called again?
Cyclopean walls?
Yes, Cyclopean walls. Those things are incredible. It shows just how good they were at engineering and that they were ready to defend what they had. What were they so afraid of, though? Like, who were they building those walls to protect themselves from?
Well, up north in the Balkans, there were these people called the Dorians.
Oh.
They were always causing trouble for the Mycenaeans with their raids and attacks. It's interesting, though, because both the Dorians and the Mycenaeans, also called the Achaeans by Homer, were part of a bigger group.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah. They were called the Proto-Indo-Europeans, sometimes called Aryans.
So these groups that were constantly fighting each other were actually related.
It seems that way. It really adds a layer of complexity to their relationship.
Wow, that's a whole other story for another day.
Absolutely.
But speaking of stories, what about the Trojan War? Was that a real event or just something Homer made up?
That's where things get even more interesting. A German archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann became obsessed with proving that the Trojan War really happened.
Sounds like my kind of guy. Obsessed with history.
Right. He was like a real-life Indiana Jones. He was so passionate about the past and wanted to uncover the truth behind the legends.
That's awesome. So what did he do?
Well, Schliemann used his fortune to excavate a site in western Turkey in 1871. He was convinced it was the location of ancient Troy.
No way. Did he find it? Like
Yeah.
the city of King Priam and Helen of Troy and the Trojan horse?
He did. It was buried under centuries of dirt and debris, but it was the ruins of a once great city.
That's incredible. So he proved that the Trojan War wasn't just a made-up story.
Exactly. And this discovery totally changed how we understood the Mycenaeans.
Because they were the Greeks who fought in the Trojan War.
Exactly. The Mycenaeans, with their warrior kings and advanced weapons, were key players in that conflict.
I bet it wasn't easy being a ruler back then, always having to be ready for war.
I can't imagine. And although they won the Trojan War, it probably took a toll on them. They might have been weakened, which made them more vulnerable to the Dorians.
So the Trojan War, this legendary event, actually had real consequences for the Mycenaean rulers and their kingdoms.
It did. And Schliemann's discoveries didn't end with Troy. He also excavated Mycenae itself, finding royal tombs full of gold and artifacts. He even found a golden funeral mask that he thought belonged to Agamemnon,
Wait, Agamemnon, like the king from the Trojan War?
the one and only. It's known as the Mask of Agamemnon and is like a symbol of ancient Greece. Turns out, though, that the mask is from a few centuries before Agamemnon.
Really?
Yeah, but still, when he found it, people were amazed. It really sparked a new interest in those ancient civilizations and their rulers.
I can see why. It's like something out of a movie.
Right. And even though Schliemann's methods might seem kind of rough by today's standards, his work showed that the world of Homer's epics was connected to a real historical context. It showed that those legendary figures were once actual rulers who shaped the fate of their people.
So these Mycenaean kings weren't just characters in stories.
Nope. They were real people who built palaces, fought epic battles, and left a legacy that has lasted for centuries.
That's pretty impressive. But what happened to them? Did they just disappear?
That's when we get to the period called the Greek Dark Ages. From about 1150 to 800 BC, things in Greece went downhill. The Mycenaean palaces were abandoned, the linear bee writing disappeared, and it seemed like the artistic and cultural achievements were just forgotten.
Sounds bleak. So is that when the Dorians finally defeated the Mycenaeans and wiped them out?
It's not that straightforward. It looks like the Mycenaeans were already weakened from internal conflicts, economic problems, and, the Trojan War.
Yep.
The Dorian invasions were probably the final straw, but it's more complicated than just one group defeating another.
History is rarely simple, huh?
It really isn't. It's like a giant puzzle made up of ambition, conflict, natural disasters, and even boring old accounting records. And to really get a grasp on those ancient rulers and their impact, we got to look at all those pieces.
So it wasn't just one thing that led to the decline of the Mycenaeans.
Right. It was a combination of factors.
It's a reminder that there's always more to the story than meets the eye.
Always. Speaking of which, let's talk about olive oil. The Mycenaeans grew olives, but not for the reason you might think.
Olive oil. Now, I'm really curious. I'm guessing this isn't your average cooking oil story?
You guessed it. The Mycenaeans used olive oil mostly as a cosmetic.
Hold on. Are you saying that these warrior kings, the guys who built those giant walls and led armies into battle, were putting olive oil on their skin?
It's true. Using olive oil for skincare and beauty rituals was actually pretty common in the ancient Mediterranean.
That's amazing. So they were not just powerful and influential, they were also into skincare.
It seems so. They were ahead of their time in more ways than one.
This is blowing my mind. We've talked about the rise and fall of two great civilizations, the impact of the Trojan War, and now the skincare routine of ancient kings. But before we go any further, let's pause for a moment and consider what we've learned. What does all of this mean in the grand scheme of things?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll delve into further as we continue our deep dive into the Mycenaeans and their incredible legacy. When we think about the big picture, it's amazing that the Mycenaeans, even though they declined, had such a huge impact on what would eventually become classical Greece.
It's like they laid the groundwork for everything that came after them.
Exactly. They were pioneers in so many ways. And it wasn't just their stuff, like their buildings or weapons that had a lasting influence. It was their stories, too, their myths and legends.
It's so cool how those stories about their kings and heroes became part of Greek culture.
Absolutely. And even though we might not know the names of all those Mycenaean rulers, they inspired some of the greatest stories in Western literature.
Like the Trojan War, Agamemnon, Achilles, Hector, those names are legendary.
Right. And think about it. Those stories were probably told around campfires thousands of years ago.
And people are still fascinated by them today. Those stories of bravery, betrayal, and fate, they're timeless.
They really are, and those stories helped keep the memory of those Mycenaean rulers alive, even during those dark ages when things were pretty rough.
It's like their spirit refused to be forgotten.
Exactly. Even though the Mycenaean civilization faded, those whispers of a glorious past survived, just waiting for the right moment to come back.
And they did come back. Around 800 BC, we see this period called Archaic Greece, where everything starts to flourish again. The city-states are growing, trade is booming, and art is everywhere.
And it wasn't like they were starting from scratch. They were rediscovering those earlier traditions and influences, like the legacy of the Mycenaeans.
It's like a phoenix rising from the ashes.
That's a great way to put it. So the Mycenaeans, with their powerful rulers and captivating stories, were reborn in the culture and politics of archaic Greece.
But how exactly did that Mycenaean influence show up? Did those later Greek city-states try to copy the Mycenaean way of governing?
Well, the political systems in archaic Greece were different from the Mycenaean era, but you can see those echoes of the Mycenaean kings in how some of their institutions and ideologies developed. like the idea of a heroic leader.
Ah, so that concept was rooted in those Mycenaean myths and legends.
Right. And it inspired generations of Greek leaders. It's also important to remember that the Mycenaeans weren't just warriors and storytellers.
Oh yeah, they were known for being great traders and skilled artisans.
You got it. They had trade networks all over the Mediterranean, bringing in goods and ideas from different places.
They definitely loved their luxury items, right? All that ivory, gold, and precious stones.
Exactly. They had a taste for the finer things, and that desire helped them expand their influence throughout the Mediterranean.
So they weren't just content to stay in their little corner of the world. They wanted to see what else was out there.
They were ambitious and wanted to connect with other cultures. They knew that real power came not just from military strength, but also from economic clout and sharing ideas.
It's amazing to think how those Mycenaean kings, wanting all those fancy goods, helped shape the entire Mediterranean world.
I know, their impact was huge and it lasted for centuries.
It's like dropping a pebble in a pond. The ripples just keep spreading.
That's a perfect analogy. And speaking of ripples, let's go back to those dark ages for a minute. Even during that time of decline, parts of Mycenaean culture survived.
Wow, so even in those dark times, the embers of the past were still burning.
Exactly. And those embers helped set the stage for that cultural rebirth in archaic Greece. It just goes to show that even when things seem lost, the past can always find a way to influence the future.
It's like those Mycenaean kings were planting seeds, even after they were gone. Seeds that would grow into a new era for Greece.
That's a beautiful way to put it. You know, when we talk about the legacy of these rulers, it's not just about specific laws or battles they won. It's about how powerful stories can be, the impact of cultural exchange, and how even when things fall apart, the past can shape the future.
This has been such an amazing journey. We've talked about the rise and fall of civilizations, figured out the truth behind ancient myths, and even learned about the beauty secrets of warrior kings. But before we wrap things up, I have a question. What happened to the Dorians? Did they just fade away after the Mycenaeans declined?
That's a great question, and it shows how complex history really is. You see, the Dorians, even though they contributed to the decline of the Mycenaeans, didn't just vanish, they became part of Greek society.
So instead of completely wiping each other out, they ended up blending together.
Exactly. The Mycenaean and Dorian story isn't just about conquest and destruction, it's also about how different cultures combined and adapted.
It reminds me that history is rarely black and white. There are so many shades of gray.
You got it. And that's one of the biggest things we can learn from our deep dive today. History isn't just a straight line from point A to point B.
It's messy and complicated.
It is. It's a tapestry woven from so many threads, representing different people, cultures, and events, and they're all connected, creating this amazing story of human civilization.
Speaking of connections, you mentioned something earlier about the Mycenaeans and their connection to a larger group, the Proto-Indo-Europeans.
Oh, yes. Now that's a topic that needs its own deep dive.
I'd love to explore that sometime.
It's a fascinating story that takes us way back in time, looking at the roots of language, culture, and how people moved across huge distances.
That sounds incredible. But for now, let's take a short break and then come back to finish our deep dive into the Mycenaeans and their enduring legacy. Welcome back, everyone. We've been on quite the adventure with these Mycenaean rulers, haven't we? Learning about their impact on ancient Greece and even like their beauty routine.
It's crazy how these little details, like using olive oil for their skin, give us a glimpse into what they valued and believed.
Right. Like we usually picture these ancient rulers as tough warriors, but they obviously cared about their appearance too.
For sure. And it just shows that history is full of surprises. The past is way more complicated than we often think.
Totally. And speaking of complicated, let's get back to the Mycenaeans and their connection to the Proto-Indo-Europeans.
Yes. That linguistic link suggests that they shared a common ancestor going way back, connecting them to tons of cultures across Europe and Asia.
So the Mycenaeans weren't just some isolated civilization. They were part of a much bigger story.
Exactly. A story of people migrating, sharing cultures, and spreading languages and traditions over huge distances.
It makes you wonder how many more stories and connections are still out there waiting to be discovered.
Absolutely. Every new archaeological find, every inscription we decipher adds another piece to the puzzle. It gives us a clearer and more complete understanding of the past.
And the Mycenaeans, who we used to only know from myths and legends, are starting to come into focus. We're learning about their complexities, their contradictions, and their impact on the world.
And what an impact it was. They influenced the development of Greek culture and mythology. They shaped trade networks across the Mediterranean. They left a mark that we still see today.
Their story is proof that even civilizations that eventually decline can still change the course of history.
And maybe their most lasting legacy is the power of their stories. The stories of their kings and heroes, passed down through generations, still resonate with us.
It's true. They speak to our deepest desires and fears about ambition, love, loss, and the struggle for power.
And those stories, woven into Greek mythology and literature, have become part of our shared heritage. It's amazing how stories can connect us across time and space.
It really is.
So as we finish our deep dive into the world of the Mycenaeans, I want to leave you with a thought. What if those Mycenaean rulers, with their ambition and their desire for knowledge and beauty, had never existed?
That's a great question.
How would history be different? It's mind-blowing to think that what people did thousands of years ago still shapes our world today.
It really makes you think. So next time you hear a story about ancient Greece, a myth, a legend, or anything about the Trojan War, remember the Mycenaeans.
Yes.
Remember the kings and queens who ruled, who fought, who traded, and who in their own way helped create the foundation of Western civilization.
You're an inspiration.
They really are.
Yeah.
Their story is a testament to human ambition, creativity, and the fact that we're all connected through history. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.